Helo pawb, a croeso I sgwrs efo Anthony Shapland hyn yma. Da ni'n ddiolchgar iawn I Anthony am ymuno efo ni, achos mae'n hynod o brysur. Ac mae wedi bod yn ffrindiau efo CARN ers blynyddoedd, a da ni'n ddiolchgar iawn iddo fo am ymuno efo ni. Felly, fel o'n i'n dweud o flaen llaw, os da chi efo unrhyw gwestiynau neu unrhyw sylwadau ar be mae Anthony siarad amdan, plis rhowch nhw yn y chat, a fyddwn ni'n dod yn ôl atyn nhw ar y diwedd. So welcome and thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and a very warm welcome to Anthony for joining us, and thank you for taking time to do this because I know you're busy. If anyone has any questions or comments, please do put them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end or when Anthony has a break or wants to point something out. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Anthony.
Thank you, Mena. Cool. I always start, or recently I've been starting talking. I'm going to talk a bit about guessing what some of you already know or don't. I'm going to talk for the first half, talk about my work as an artist, and then the second half talk about my work, my other jobs, as well as G39. Because I'm never quite sure like how much do people know about G39 or like who the people behind it, which is a tiny team of artists, and I'm never sure like how much people know about the work I make as well. But recently I've thought a lot about how we all arrive at what we do, like in terms of making artworks, not just where we come from, but how we get to it. And I realized that I've got a very specific relationship with place, and a specific relationship really with where I sort of mentally put contemporary work. So this is a picture of Balgoed, where I'm from, and it's taken in about 1984-ish. So you can kind of see it's an ex-industrial, it's an ex-mining. The hill is not a hill, it's a slag heap. And although this picture makes things look quite grim, at the time it was like anywhere else. It was a playground, and it was just where I grew up. It wasn't, sometimes in documentation of South Wales valleys, they're all in black and white. There's usually a horse wandering around and a child without a shoe or something, and they're so usually made to look quite depressed, but that's not the memory when you're living through it. It's a very specific place. So on the right hand side of the photograph, there's a there's a railway line that runs, and I grew up right next to the railway line, just out of sight of this shot. So for me, growing up in a valley where there was by kind of 84, there was no cinema, let alone gallery space. The idea that I wanted to be an artist is not in my family. None of my family are particularly academic, so nobody had gone to college, let alone university at that point. So the sense of where art was for me was that it meant it was away from home. So the railway line that's there, like a lot of the lines in South Wales, only went north to south. So it went from Rumney in the north to Cardiff in the south. So there wasn't much traffic because of those kind of the way the roads and rivers and rail ran. Like you didn't really go sideways. You didn't really go into the next valley. You went kind of one way or the other. Especially if rail was your main route of transport. So for me, straight away when I was young, my route to contemporary art meant leaving where I was. It wasn't where I was. And I grew up thinking that artists were not from where I was from. And I realized how much of an impact that has had on what I've expected from a career in visual arts. And this isn't to kind of say, poor me, it was really hard, but when you don't think anybody is like you where you are, and your choice to do the thing you want to do is to leave, it's quite a peculiar psychology. So this is home, and this is still, like, I live in Cardiff now, but family still live here. And a lot of the works I've made over the years have been kind of between here and there. So a really early work, and I won't go way back, but in 2002 I made a really simple film called Rise, which found a little bit of home, a little bit of the kind of, I grew up like next to these fields and on a hill, a little bit of the soundtrack from there, which was a dawn chorus that I recorded there, was paired with a street lamp from Cardiff, and I filmed the moment at dusk when it goes, when the light levels are deemed to be low enough for the filament to switch on. And the piece was called Rise, and it was super simple. Kind of, the narrative was there was an unlit lamp, and then it lit, and then it kind of went into this orange glow. But the filament became like an artificial sunrise in a way. So paired with the bird song from the other end of the day, there was this sort of funny, twilighty in-between state. And it's a kind of place that features in a lot of work, that kind of finding one in the other, or pairing opposites, or putting things together that are from that, specifically that time of day, actually, when it's uncertain. Your eyes go from cones to rods, and there's some uncertainty about definitions and rules, and the daytime to the nighttime. So a lot of work was made after I kind of came back to Wales, was made between here and there. And this was made up on the top of Gelligaer Common, which was as far as we would walk at the time, where it was also, I realised, a kind of a boundary or territory edge where there was a massive amount of fly tipping. And this still is, like, in the border where you come up from the Rumney Valley, you hit here, and then you drop down to the Bogey Road that goes towards Merthyr on the other side. And it was like a no man's land in between. It was as far as we would go when we were kids to play. And it was also kind of, but it's also kind of where stuff gets dumped. And I wanted to make, this was made for a show that I was invited into in Russia for a group called Hotel Antelope. But I wanted something inexplicable to happen and then stop and kind of look at what notice is taken of it or not. And there was discarded rubbish there already, but there was in the film a discarded Christmas tree ignites, burns, and then burns out, and the scene stops, and nobody really takes notice of it. Nobody really kind of pays attention to it. And just I took the tree there. That was the only thing I took there, and I took away its charred remains at the end, so I didn't contribute to the fly tipping in any way. But this early work was kind of links to some later stuff, where part of making the film, I came out of a fine art degree. I wasn't a filmmaker. It was kind of, so filmmakers often work in, like, there'd be a sound man and a kind of a props man and a cameraman and an editor. And this is very much in the artist kind of sole worker route, where I was everything. So I had to work out in advance, like, how to make something combust from a distance, and how to control it enough for it to burn out without causing problems. So I became this weird, I remember at the time kind of naively searching kind of detonator, and my search history probably alerted every police force in the area, but I had to be working out how to make something artificial feel quite natural. And I'll kind of come back to that in a bit. And this was how it was shown on a monitor. And then bringing some of that stuff together, I made a film for Chapter in 2008. But in the film, there was a two-part scene. So there was the outside of a house and the inside of a house, where on the inside was a manufactured set, and on the outside was a real lighting film crew that I'd asked to restage quite a carefully measured dawn sequence, but we would play it at dusk at dusk in the nighttime. And the trick or the question here, like the their previous work, was whether they could build such a convincing dawn sequence that Tex, the canary who was inside, would wake as if it was morning and sing in the film. So there's just these two screens where one is actually artificial because the room set up with the canary was a set, and the other is a real documentary of a lighting crew, which was shown 2 screens at Chapter. And then this was the last work of that time, which was looking at, I had to propose this to them as it's only a 2-shot film where for the majority of the shot, you see straight through the window, you see the view. And as dusk descends outside, the window in front of you becomes a mirror because it's just reflecting the light inside. So what you assume is a moon or a sun becomes the light bulb, and you realize you're quite close to somebody else inside a space. And it was connected in a lot of ways. This is my dad, who I worked with. He died 2 years after we filmed this, back in 2009. And it was to do with a kind of a slower pace of being at home, where he would like there were times when I'd ask him what he was doing, because he'd just be staring, and his answer would always be that he was planning. And there was something, I realized that there was something as well about the surrogate characters that started to appear in work, where I thought, are these all in some way, they're all a certain kind of lone figure, usually male, quite self-contained or absorbed in what they're doing or how they're working. And I worked with this community in Spain over a period of, it was only a period of 2 weeks, but I worked with them in Spanish. But there was 4 of them who were the security guards for an art centre there. And I spent time with them and lived with them in the kind of security centre, which was the crypt of the art centre. And they led this weird life where they would live there in rotation. So their lives were kind of isolated apart from each other, because they would monitor the CCTVs for this whole art centre that was there. So I'm just running through some of the characters that I'd made work about. Then I made work about, I'd remembered a scene from when I was a child about, I remembered a point when a camera was pulled back from a TV program, and it just veered off and showed like the edges. It showed over here where you can't see, so this could all be a set. And it was the first time when I was very young that TV stopped just being on a window on reality and became a window on something that was constructed or made for this lens in a way. And the person who was on camera at that time, and it was Blue Peter in the 70s, the late 70s, and I was amazed I remembered it, because I didn't know I remembered it until I started writing about the experience. But he was a match carver, and he was on TV for like 5 minutes, and his only word, I found the footage since, his only word was yes, that's right, I think, was the only thing he said on telly. But he was just this obsessive. He carved these out of just like cooking matches that were about this big. And I'd got really stuck with making work at one point, and this became like a background piece of work where I didn't know, it wasn't really a film. I didn't know a lot about the guy. I didn't know a lot about why I was doing it. It didn't quite fit with previous works, but I kind of got really interested in who he was, what he did, how focused that work was, and not it just looked at a time when doing something on this scale for no gain, in a way, for like just to achieve another match and another match. And like his proudest thing is that chain, the ball and chain that's there is one match when it's an articulated chain, and he's just this kind of focused sense of making. And then I would research him, and he was kind of like nobody. He had that 5 minutes, and that was it. But he would pop up every now and then. Like, somebody sent me this article from an American magazine where he's talked about, even though I could find no evidence that he was ever in America. It's like he wasn't known. And the research into him, I carried on working with props. I carried on working with the idea of recreating something. And I made the title sequence of the potential film of his life, even though I didn't know the story of his life and couldn't find out a lot about him. So I worked with a props, a woman who worked in props for the BBC, and we remade his like work desk. And then we filmed a sequence that was that left space for titles. So when I found out more about him, I could potentially add things. I deliberately say I work with film, but I've avoided putting clips into this because I know on Zoom, film clips, you'll just get like that, like weird stoppy motion things, but they're all on my website or on Vimeo. Like they're quite findable. So with this guy, he was called Ray Cook, and he became like this title sequence, which was shown on this monitor, which was like the monitor I saw when the camera panned off. He also became this set of, for a show called Setsuko Hara, it became a set of fictional books as if he already had a life story. So I took like existing sequences of book covers, and made this set that all only had one chapter, which was the only thing I knew. Like he'd gone to BBC and he'd filmed this tiny bit for Blue Peter. So I sampled like older Penguin books and I made up covers, and these are all fictional, but I got them made into dummy books so that they look convincingly like as if his life story was done and written down. And then from that, it became, this was made for Leipzig. It's like the film poster of the film that was never made of this guy. And it got kind of, you can imagine when you can start to invent a whole world around somebody because you don't know much, you can kind of do what you want. They become fictional. And even though he's half real, they become something else. And then the last person I wanted to speak to, I think it's 3 years ago or 4. I worked with, there was a character in Cardiff called Alan Cavley, who was the sign writer for the city, kind of for the city. He did he did shop signs and he did pub menus and he did A-boards, and he wasn't in the kind of hipster tradition. He was kind of old school. He'd walk around with a mile stick and he would kind of do this kind of weird curly scroll. And I could recognize his writing like anywhere across town that you could see, oh, that's a Cavley, and he's from Pontypridd, and he was like, and he was gay, and he was like the kind of the connection and he was the storyteller of the city. And I worked with him for some time to film him as what he was doing, as he was retiring, really. He was stopping what he was doing. And the show was called something, can't remember, A Sign for the City, I think, or something like that. And this brings me, sorry for jumping through things, but to much more recent work. Like I was working out this work the last time I spoke to you all at CARN. I was working towards at the time for a show in Oriel Davis, and I'd had some exhibiting success in a way. Like the museum owns one of those films, which is a blessing and a curse because one of the films has got a hill in it. I'm classed as a landscape artist, which is, so you keep getting put in a little box, and it's really hard to get people. Like some people say, oh, you're the guy who makes really slow films. And it's really hard to sometimes go, that's not what I do. But this thing keeps kind of coming and haunting me and defining like everything I'm doing now, and I can't undo it. And I probably fall back into the same rut. But I had a time when I was doing a talk like this where it was almost like I was listening to myself talk nonsense. No, it wasn't nonsense. I was listening to myself and hearing words where I thought, where the other voice, like you're doing the spiel and you're making your story really neat, as if there's no dead ends and no tangents and nothing you've discarded. And this voice in the back of my head was like, what do you mean by urban and rural? What do you mean like documentary and fiction, and what do you mean by prop? And I kind of undid a little bit of what I was doing, in a good way, I think, because I took it apart to really understand what was happening with it. And I realized there was a subtext that I'd always assumed might be readable to some people. And part of a story that I've started kind of tonight is about, not only at that time in Bargoed, all those kind of years before, was I thinking, well, art is somewhere else. I was also, it took me a massively long time to come out as gay as well. And that, if you kind of Russell Davis and It's a Sin as preempted, like the mid-80s was like the worst time to just discover hormones and think, oh, I think I'm gay, I'm not sure, and I don't know, kind of. So I had this point, I think, where mimicry and props, like if you're pretending to the world for nearly, like I didn't come out till I was nearly 20, if you're pretending to the world for 20 years that you're slightly not who people think you are, that does have an impact on what you do. And I think the idea or the sense of the world as kind of malleable, and like if I'm pretending to be something, why can't the world be not quite real, or be mutable or changeable? Or, and I got even more of a sense of that working in, because I work in visual arts, and I build and I make things here all the time. Like that's the thing that, when I say here, this is G39 where the Wi-Fi works. But you kind of build shows up and then you take them down, and then you build them up again and you take them down. And I started to think about the world in that way, really, like building, like everything as shifting, and everything as a prop, everything as a kind of transient thing. So where was I going with this? So yeah, so mid-80s, but kind of aware that I was gay. Nobody to, like, I tried to articulate this to somebody recently, but there was nowhere you could, like, you couldn't Google it. I mean, the nearest you got was to hurriedly look into in an encyclopedia and just be horrified by what you read. Or like, as I grew a little bit older, like I'd lean into the gay pub in Cardiff, the King's Cross, and like pick up the pink paper and maybe read that, but have to bin it as soon as I'd finished with it. So there was a real sense of not. And then of course, bloody, by 1986, so I'm 15, and the Tombstone adverts start, and there's a disease and it affects gay men. And when all you can do is hear that played in the background and not be able to ask anybody, like you just think, well, all gay men. So if am I that? Like, is that me? And I kind of, and I'd said, like, since then, until relatively recently, when I did a bit of a re-evaluation of things, I'd sort of said to everybody I knew now, I said, oh, I was, I was all right. I came out and everyone was fine, and which is sort of half true. But when I look back, there were proper times of desperately trying to be normal. So there were times of really, like, to the point of like saving money and then secretly sending a postal order to get like a hypnotherapy tape to become normal. And looking back now, I just think that wasn't normal. That was not a good thing. That was a really weird thing to be doing. So sorry, I've stuck on this slide. So this will stay in your head whenever you remember that I'm gay. But I realized that part of the mimicking, part of the props making, part of the pretense of film was doing something that was related very much to like that situation, which went on for quite a long time. So sorry, I haven't even said what it is. So for this show in Oriel Davis, I was working a lot with Foley artists and Foley techniques, which is like making a false sound underneath film soundtracks. Like it's being quickly replaced by digital effects. But this is the sound of wind through trees, and it's just audio and videotape attached to a fan, and we've just recreated them. And part of the exhibition was just 3 or 4 or 5 photographs of sounds in motion. So the title is "The Wind Through Trees." And then the main part of the exhibition, which looks a bit terrible in here, but there's 3 screens. There's a main screen which was written and filmed in the, let's see if I can, yeah, this is better. So it was filmed with an actor called Ben Owen, and he's from Argoed, which is just over the hill from Bargoed. So we trod the same ground in lots of ways. And I got him to, I wanted to make a film that was in those places that were in the early part of the talk, like the top of Gellir Common and the lower part of the valley where the house was. And we did a few days filming where we went up on the train, and the bottom right hand image, he's like, I took this still deliberately, but that window in the corner was me, my brother and my sister's bedroom at one time. So it was literally going home. And then we worked our way. I talked to him. It was not scripted, but I talked to him about that sense of, like, if you bunk off school when you used to, when you did, when I did anyway, once or twice, it was almost like you had to be out all day, but you had to kind of not really do anything or be massively conspicuous. So it was like finding those places to be that were in the background of towns. And we arrived on the train to Bargoed, and then we moved up and up and up, and in 3 sort of phases of kind of messing about in a way. And it's not autobiographical, but partly it is. And I wanted to make this film as visceral and filmic as possible, because the plan within it is that there are 2 screens going on, and there's a third out of shot. Everything on the large screen, which was quite filmic, was voiced by this guy, who's a Foley artist. So every sound effect, every leaf rustle, every water splash, everything was done. There was no soundtrack to the first film at all. But I wanted to see whether this voice, this other actor, in a way, this Foley actor, could convincingly stand in for the other. So you could see both things at the same time. It is whether or not, like the canary with the dawn sequence, it was like whether you could wholeheartedly believe in one thing so much that it didn't matter that you could see it was a fake. And then the third screen had a scrolling, like an auto cue text that was the narration of it. But the only thing that that the Foley artist couldn't voice was, I asked Ben to shout across to another hill when he reached the top. So the only thing missing, there's this sudden silence where the voice should be. So the kind of the true voice of the actor in the film is totally missing, but it's only when that point happens that you can really see that the Foley artist steps back, nothing happens, and there's this gap where there should be sound. I'm probably talking too long about the wrong things, but I hope I'll make sense later. And this was another of the large scale photographs, which is, and each of the photographs plays a part in the film. So this is called, I think it was Breaking Bones, which is crushing crab apples against parquet flooring, is a sound quite often used, or hazelnuts, I think. And then this is Creaking Trees, which is like a leather wallet does so much for Foley. Like, it's a leather wallet is the sound of the poltergeist head turn as well. So they're all in the show alongside the film. And then the second work, they were all focused on sound, was another, like, we're so hungry for narratives that make sense. It was a 4-screen piece where an opera singer appears to break a glass. But there's one screen with 2 sound technicians on, and there's another screen with the singer on it. And then a third screen with the glass on it that quivers and eventually breaks. But when I showed it, I realized I was being almost too convincing as a narrative, because everybody believed that that was the sequence of events, when it really, they were all in the same, it was impossible for those 3 things to have happened as a sequence together, because they all shared the same space, and you can see quite clearly like things happening in the same spot that couldn't exist. And then the last part of the show was a book that was a lot of those things that I thought about and remembered, like pretenses or fibs that were told, or it was called 52 Sundays, and it was about like how with my mother, who's on the cover of the book, we have a debate all the time about whether a week starts on a Monday or a Tuesday, or a Monday or a Sunday, and she won't have a calendar that starts on a Monday. So it was like, how do we, what is a Monday and a Sunday is then both an ending and a beginning, like they join up together. But it was a collection of photographs from that were from lots of ex-partners or people I've lost. And I say lost, I mean lost touch with, not necessarily like everyone who's dead. But they were just collected and gathered as photographs that were either discarded by people or left over, or in the olden days when you had them in an envelope, they'd have a sticker on saying blurred or out of focus, or it was all of those paired with these little kind of anecdote texts. And then recently, like a big realization, this is a film, it was quite long, but it was made for Spit and Sawdust in Cardiff, and it had to be, Spit and Sawdust is like half gallery, half cafe, half skate park, and it's quite an amazing mix of things. But they asked me to make a film, and I was so pleased that to make something for them, and it had to work. Like if you couldn't hear it, it had to work. So there was a lot of text with it, and there was a lot of scripting, but there were some things you didn't need to understand. But I'd read about a big part of what I talked about before, like mimicry was a thing. I'm really bad for like I'm so bad. If I speak to somebody with a Birmingham accent, I'll slowly have a Birmingham accent. If I speak to I realized it when I went on a residency once, and there was a guy from Arnhem, and I realized I was speaking to him as if English was my second language, like a weird stilted European chat. I think, yeah, and I just thought, oh my God, I just imitate everybody, because I so want to blend in. And I think this goes back as well. So I want to fit in with things that I start to sound like people. And that's like, is that disingenuous? What is that from? And then I read about like when actors act, a bit of their brain like actually switches off. And it happens with languages and accents as well, where I'll get it wrong, I'll just call it a hippocampus, but it's not that. But it actually dulls. They did a scan of a brain while somebody was acting, performing lines, and it dulls. And it's where your sense of self is held. And I just paired that story about imitation with another story I'd heard about, like starlings are amazing mimics. And there was a story about like starlings mimicking a phone ringtone in New York so well that flocks of them would just go around causing havoc, and people would answer their phones. And I paired it with like this idea of actors mimicking something else, like by switching off. So it was kind of, I really enjoyed making this because I think I'd forgotten that making work should be fun. And I'd got so focused at times on kind of the finished thing or career, or I don't know, all the things that I wonder sometimes now if there's like the career bit and the studio bit are almost separate, because the studio bit sometimes suffers if the career bit becomes obsessive. And And I loved making, it's a really rambling, longish film with beautiful bits in it and trials in it, and like some dead ends and some tangents, and just trying things out and remembering that making work is a joy, really, if that's not too naive. And then that was shown, so the show that was in Oriel Davies went to Exeter, but with new additions. And I'm going to do a plug for the Welsh Food Bank Fund. The poster that's here, Small Town Man, which is that picture of Bargoed, is available on the Welsh Food Bank profile. I think that's what it's called. At £25 a print, like not that big, like but all the money goes to Taff Bargoed Food Bank. So that's my plug, but it's a worthy one. And then in this show, the Oriel Davies works were shown, as well as some others. But yeah. Now, so this is always the question then. Like, my family weren't and aren't really like arts background, and none of them really understand what I do here. Still, like they don't. It's not that they're not interested, but just to give a measure, like it was only 3 weeks ago when my mother said, "Oh, how did that thing that you did in Mid Wales go?" And I was thinking that was 2 years ago. Like it's just not a kind of focus. So I put this in when I've talked to other people about how many other things have to happen over the years, have had to happen for G39 to exist, or for making work to exist. And I bet, I know loads of people will recognize it, where you're kind of like, the opportunities happen and you kind of, sometimes I just say, oh yeah, I'll do that, and I have no idea, and I'll learn how to do something. Or but these are not everything I do now, but they're everything I've ever done, all the way through to what I do here. And so for people who don't know G39, G39 is now an unbelievable 23 years old this year. It's an artist-run space in Cardiff, and I was the founder with Chris Brown. And to an extent, like this everything I've shown you, this runs like underneath it all. So I don't just go and sit in the studio and noodle about and make work, but this is constant. So today I've been installing and mopping floors here while thinking, oh, what am I going to talk about this evening? And like coming in and dropping slides in and things. But yeah, G39 is an artist-run space. It's still an artist-run space. So we've not, lots of spaces that have been alive that long have tended to morph into something else, like something much more kind of structured. But it started here, the green bit. I moved back to Wales in 97. I studied in Southampton. I went to London for a year, wondered while I was in London why I was in London, and I was there because everybody else was. But I did learn quite a lot I was in London and I couldn't afford to be in London. I didn't have a proper job. So I was working for artist-run spaces while I was there as a volunteer. And I learned a lot. Like I worked for a space called the Tannery and Cable Street Arts, and lots of different pockets of work that was happening at a time when the bit that I was in and around was really changing, like 96, 97. So I came back, and the top right-hand room of this shop called Kaleidoscope was my flat, and it was like a cheap flat. Nobody lived in the city centre. This was properly like sort of the arse end of town. It was chip shops and sex shops, and some cats lived in a hedge just out of shot. So it wasn't like it is now. This is Mill Lane now, which is just like a row of bars and loud music. But at the time it was like nobody lived in town at all. And if this was when I got to know the signwriter Alan Cavley. So I moved back, and the space that was my flat, which is putting it kindly, it was a room, and for a shower I had to go to the Empire Pool that was nearby. But I couldn't live there anymore because there was no fire exit. So it turned into a studio space. And then I was thinking, at the time, I'd come back to Wales when everybody I knew had either had gone elsewhere or were making work for somewhere else, but not really getting seen. So at the time there was Chapter, a space called Oriel was still in existence, and Photo Gallery were the only spaces that you could approach. And I was 26 and quite naive, and I didn't really have any friends. So I thought I'll do something that I thought would last a year. And this is a long shot of what it was like, probably about 99. So I'm not going to massively talk about the first space, but it was where we kind of, our ambition was to bring together, I could see, I've always been interested in, like, if there's an art scene in Wales, like who's in it and who says who's in it, and how is it different, and how do things connect? How do artists connect in that? Like, and recently, like, how do different generations connect in that as well? Because I think we have a tendency to, like, overwrite the past and forget what's happened before quite a lot. So the first venue, it was tiny. I mean, it was like I think the rooms were 6 meters by 4 meters tops, and it was 3 floors high. And I'm tidying up this story because at the beginning it was because the shop owner let us use it, and then we started talking to the Arts Council, and that was slowly building, like, it took years before we had enough trust, and eventually we became, just before we left this building, we became portfolio clients of the Arts Council. But it took a really long time, and it's not just me, like the same with CARN. It'll be the connection of individuals make something that's bigger than any one person can do. So there's me and Chris and Sean Edwards and an artist called Jenny Savage, and now Chinsianu Tidley, Sam Hasler, Ellie Young, Chris Brown, me, Alid Simons, technicians, and like all sorts of people join, and more than I'm even mentioning over the years, to make this thing happen. And we did projects across town, but we did reach a point where the city centre where we were was developed. Like, it was properly, like, when we saw John Lewis and Jamie's Kitchen opposite, that our time in that building was done, and we got they foreclosed on the lease we had, and we had to leave it. And then we spent we spent about 6 months pretending everything was fine, even though we didn't have any home. But nobody really knew that we didn't have a home. I just kept saying, oh, it'll be really good, it'll be really exciting. And we eventually found this space, which is a massive change, like from this little Victorian vertical white cube in the middle of town to this kind of semi-industrial chocolate brown warehouse that's just slightly on the edge of town. And partly we needed a different attitude and different tools to do it. So I'll rattle through this bit, and then you can ask me more questions if you've got time. So the biggest change was this scale thing, and one of the biggest difficulties was the size of us as G39 didn't change from one space to the other. And I call it scaring bears, where we've always pretended to be bigger than we are. So, like, we once had an ambassador from Croatia, because there was a Croatian artist in a show, turn up in a car with little flags on, because he thought we were like an institute, and he just turned up at this tiny space. It was really nice, but we've always sort of appeared like we're larger than we are. And this was like, this space is big, but actually what we wanted to do was to switch from big to quite intimate spaces all the time. So you didn't lose that sense of that people had, that they sort of had an investment in it, or they could be in it or not. So this was the first on the top left was the first opening thing where we just wanted people to see the space. So on the floor, just where I'm standing, is the footprint of the old space, and then it went back. It was just this huge, drafty, cold space. But Bridgend Council had a tree cut down, a 20-foot Christmas tree, and I thought, oh, brilliant! We'll buy, like, that's 30 quid. Like, we can buy that, and I'll put it up. And I put it up, and that's 20 foot, and it looked like a little railway toy. And I thought, things are going to be quite different in this space. The other thing we were keen to do, we've always been keen to mix like emerging artists with established artists, and artists from Wales and Welsh artists with international artists, to keep a kind of conduit of conversation happening. The thing that was new in this space was it allowed us to have, like, often when you have galleries, a gallery is like a presenting space, and then a studio is like a making space, and they're always like, the making space or the mess is hidden away. So you see, like, and we still do it sometimes, but you kind of see a freshly painted space with things in it like they've just landed from nowhere, and you don't see the trace of who's made it and how they've made it. And in this space, like, we're keen to bring those things a bit closer together. So we've gone backwards in a way. Like, some artist run spaces come out of studios, and we're putting the studios in the middle of the showing spaces. So these are from, or at least two of these images are from, that's Rafael Zajko doing a performance, but they're from a season called Unite that we've done each year, where the space is just given over to a set of artists. And then I'll scroll through. So some of these are from Unite. And then there's projects like the top right is Rabab Ghazul's project called Democracy Sandwich, and Toby Huddleston down the bottom. And this is what it looks like when it's half built. So we treat it more like a courtyard than a room. So the work, in a sense, is the important bit, and then we try and construct around the work, which has been can be quite exhausting, because if everything can always change, and we go back to what I was talking about earlier, like, everything's scenery, so the gallery can move around the artist in a way that sometimes fixed spaces can't, although we've got a bit more fixed recently. And then running the resource program. So this was an artist walk talk that was arranged. This is a little while ago, but so trying to keep volunteers, artists, and visiting artists kind of connected in some ways with activity. And we're still doing, this was for Cardiff Contemporary, still working, not just closing ourselves in the warehouse, but working off-site with stuff. It means there's the possibility of music production and kind of presenting the venue as having multi-use, which recently I've been much more not receptive to. Kind of another principle, another guiding principle, and I'm sure lots of us share it, is that we're still not like cash rich by any means, but what we realized we needed to do was, instead of looking for cash, instead of that kind of cash as our resource, if you like, what have we got that we can share? So knowledge sharing is key. We've got a library with books in it, and we've got tools, and we've got space when it's not being used, and we've got like a venue. And like, how do you make all of your resources as available as you possibly can to encourage not just art crowds to connect with you and kind of inhabit the space? So in the last year, we've done a lot of events that have been kind of slightly sideways or different directions. And then some pictures from Unite, and then I've asked that. So this is from the front of the space a little while ago when I was on sabbatical. So it was a curator called Jude Bennett who was running the program, and just some of the events inside that were happening, with Ellie Harrison on the top left, and then Freya Dooley, who early days was part of Unite. And this is kind of how the space shifts. So we've made it so that it's quite easy to remake and remodel bits and pieces of it. And then I'll run through because I think I'm probably well over time. So Toby Huddleston. Oh, this was working with Alex Rich as well as part of Cardiff Contemporary, where a trumpeter we know called Eirig wrote some pieces to play to dusk. And this is the funny tower that was built to watch a boat race or something on the barrage that we got access to. It was always pink. We didn't paint it pink. Toby Huddleston, who was part of the John Gingell Award. And then this is just an example of how you can switch the spaces around. So in winter, it's bloody freezing to be in the space, but without, given that they're 3 board panels, you can build spaces in a really simple way, like a kind of 10 screws are holding the whole thing together kind of way, to allow for reading groups and things like that. Catrin and Lewis, and a massive paint pour that so many people were convinced wasn't wet and would just put their toe in it and then walk around the gallery with wet paint on their foot. Freya Dooley then picking up like career a bit later on. This was called Rhythms and Disturbances. And then we were able in the space to host, like, this is Bedwy's Venice show, that we were just really pleased when we chatted about it, and we were able to do it by, I think between Bedwyr and Jude, they worked out how the things that were in Venice in this very specific space could rework into this space here. And I think it worked really well. And then Carwyn Evans' solo show. And then small, like, group shows where there's international work at the back of the room with Angharad's work at the front. And then workshops like the MOOC group and the Welsh language group by Paul Eastwood in the top left. And the bottom left is Thomas Williams, who worked with the Trinity Refugee Centre on a long-term project. Serena Corder and her Pots That Sing. And then hosting kind of gig-like events, which was what tripped us up just as we went into lockdown, was a group called Rat Trap. Ellen, Meredith and Gwenny and Carlotta, they'd sold 200 tickets for a music gig that was supposed to be late March last year. It was like the worst thing to have planned at that particular time. And then worked with independent curators. This is a Wales-India exchange. And this was one where I had to, this was the end show of the Wales in Venice group that were over. I had to kind of bring together 23 artists in a structure. So I built, I reused all the timber. We don't waste anything, I reuse everything. But the timber structure was a build of the flat that they all lived in. So the footprint of the structure was that. So it looked like this, like that was where the kitchen was. So the work was displayed kind of where it was grown. And then solo shows like, this is Holly Davey in the back of the space, and Lydia Meehan, and the Unite programme. That's Liam O'Connor ironing a massive painting that he'd made. And then off-site things like Art Car Boutique, where people could text whatever they wanted to the sign, the road sign. And then recently, bits of Unite, bits of a show called Sprung Spring, which is about when things that should be funny get awkward, or when awkward things get funny. And then more recently, that one's from Rumble Strip, which is kind of right on the money, really. It was about when things start to go wrong and whether we take notice of that or not, which is the littler image. And that's it. So I'm in time for questions. Sorry if that was a bit random.
No, it's good. Thank you very much, Anthony. Like, even though I've had a talk with you before, there's still things there that were completely new to me. So thank you very much.
That's good.
So just to ask everyone, if there's anyone that's got a question or got any comments, please put them in the chat box now, or you can put, there's a Q&A box, and Anthony will answer them. Everyone's just saying thank you very much talking through it and saying it's class from Gwenny Lloyd and all that. And then, yeah, just a couple of other comments along those lines. Yeah, it's just a couple of things that I'd like to pick up on quickly. Just it's just brilliant that how you started it off, basically. I know that other people have come to join it and that's how it's grown to how it is, but it's quite inspirational, to say the least, Anthony. So, because obviously that's, as you know, CARN's comes sort of from another way, but we are grassroots sort of things. We come through the Arts Council by the APP, but what's there now, and as you know, is the grassroots sort of artists coming together to build on things. So yeah, hopefully we'll still be here in 23 years time, so we'll see.
I'll stop sharing. I can't believe it's that long. So
I know.
It's been, I think the thing that's kept us kind of sane has been that we changed, like we regularly checked in and changed how we were doing things.
Yeah.
And I'm super aware as well that, like, you know, the art world might not need a nearly 50-something white gay male. There's quite a lot of them. So I'm super conscious of checking in, like, is this the right thing to be doing? Especially like over the last year, like,
yeah,
where do I best support people whose voices are maybe not as present and not as kind of clear? Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we've had some questions in, so I'll ask them to you, so if you can see them. But Gaia Redgrave, hello, saying, how do you envisage the future as an artist and organisation post-COVID?
Oh, that's a big one.
It's a big question.
I think it's funny because with everyone at the moment, all the pieces are up in the air, and it's been like it's just been universally kind of things that we thought were just set in stone and how things are have now fractured, and we've got a chance of putting those pieces back together in a different way. And I think we have to take advantage of that kind of opportunity to say, well, it was like this before and that just didn't work, but there was no time, you're so kind of caught up in the hamster wheel of just operating that you can't question those things. So as an artist, I think my perspective shifted a bit with the piece I made for Spit and Sawdust, where I've been making a lot of work where I'm enjoying it, which is really nice. But I also haven't got that kind of, it's weird, it's not saying I haven't got the drive to show it, but I've realized that the obsessing about career in terms of my work is not useful to studio development, and studio development is the thing I'm getting the most back from. In terms of the organisation, we're looking, like, we've been doing a lot of work with Inequalities Action Plan, which is partly prompted by the Arts Council, but actually has been massively, the conversations we've been having with each other about what we change, how we change, and what we have been really useful. One of the things is we realised, so this might be boring to anybody who's not involved in a space, but we realised that lots of spaces, like, it's almost like the structures that, the structures of funding and the structures of council and the structures of charities in a way are quite like a pyramid, and there's a director, or there's somebody at the top, and then there's tiers as it goes down to a kind of wider base, and we're all at the wider base, mostly artists are. And we've thought a lot about how do we undo that? Like, how do we exist? Because we are a charity, but how can we exist in a more horizontal way? And Nia Metcalf from Spit said to me a few years ago, like, we had a discussion, it was like, why shouldn't somebody who works behind a bar be able to afford a mortgage or be able to live in the way, like, there seems a real tiering, kind of tiers of what people can expect.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're going to do, it's quite easy for us to do it, but I think it might set a good example, is to look at how do we flatten, why is it that intellectual labour is valued more than labour, is one question. And then why is it that so many arts organisations put the front of house or education or support roles lower than the curatorial role? So we're looking at, can we have, this is one structural change to kind of encourage a more kind of churn. Can we have just one wage, one pay scale for everybody at whatever jobs they're doing, instead of that kind of, here's the people who are important and here are the people who aren't important, and working that all the way through to artists as well, so that actually we become much more flat structure. That's answering, as Gaia said, as an organisation, that's like the next thing I've been puzzling through. How do we do that? Yeah.
That's interesting. I'd like to know what you say about that after this sort of thing. Okay, next question from Tracy Simpson. Hey Tracy, so it's a great range of work, she says, and what's next for your work, Anthony?
Ooh. Well, I've been speaking to a woman who runs a stunt flock of starlings.
Oh, God.
I didn't know there was such a thing. So some of that work that I was testing out might develop in that way. I've been doing a lot, like in G39, I do a lot of the kind of the backgroundy design things with a designer called John, and I've been working a lot on pieces of print that are at the moment like nowhere. They exist but there's a publication that might be coming out soon. But it's a publication where you have to buy it like a paella. You have to buy it as a pair because you have to rip it in half as part of it. So that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Okay, really interesting. Again, can't wait to see what comes from that one. Okay, the next question we got is from Sarah Treble Parry.
Oh,
hello. And she says, collaboration is a huge part of G39. What partnerships or collabs would you love to see in the future? And wonderful talk.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it's a tricky moment. Like at the moment, we're really looking at paying artists well, and not only paying them like as an artist fee one-off, but working out, we feel like we might be in a position to affect some change in so paying artists well and paying putting out access costs for people who haven't been able to access what we do in the past, or thinking wider about what do artists really need from something, and dialogues, and it's meant just recently, I suppose there has been a pandemic, but we feel like we've slowed down a little bit because the amount of artists we can support in that way is a smaller pool. We want to push for that to be bigger, and I think I'd really like to work on a more open curatorial program. So pushing out, throwing a kind of, I didn't have a formula before, but kind of opening it up, I think, to younger or new curators or new voices, which we've done in the past, and which is how we met. We worked with Dominic and Real Institute years ago, and Cassie Needham years ago. How the program shifts on is being open to other voices, and that horizontal structure allowed for that sort of fluidity, I think. Yeah, I don't know if that's
no, Pap, thank you.
Lots of things, but supporting, I think the main thing is I want to work towards artists not just having showing opportunities, but having kind of sustainable background support in what they do, with an eye on artists in Wales, of course. Yeah,
no, I agreed. Totally what's needed, isn't it? And Tracy's just replied saying that she didn't expect that answer about stunt flock of starlings and paella. I don't think anybody did.
It means I've got to do it now because I've said it.
Yeah, and it's in black and white. So Okay, is there any other questions or comments from anyone? I think we've got one more here. Just give them in the chat box or the Q&A otherwise. So we got one from Julia Epmeyer. Hello, Julie. So she says, having been involved with G39 for so long, how do you see the end? What would you end it, and what should end it? Or do you just see yourself stepping out? Not that I want you to, but always think about these things when I start something.
I think we're surprised, like it's that it's here. Like there's been so many times when we've nearly not existed, but I have got a plan. But it might not be G39, but it might be. I have been thinking about like I don't know if this is just me, but like, hardly any of us have got a pension, right? Like artists and pensions is just like no way. It's like we're all hoping for something. So I thought, what about the first like artist-run care home / pensioners home, where you have a gallery in the middle, and then you have live, work, accommodation all around the outside, and then we can still make work, but still be an artist-run space. That's my next plan.
That's the dream. The next day.
I think it's brilliant. Yeah. Why aren't we already doing it?
Yeah, exactly. It's obviously the next step. Yeah, everyone's saying it's a great idea, and everyone's agreeing with you.
Well, we had this fantasy of like, well, maybe you could join, and then like one tier of art, like if like depending on what age group you were in, like people who needed support could get support, and then as people move up the tiers, they could get support, and it would be perfect.
Sounds brilliant. Sounds like the dream.
We just need somebody with a lot of money or a massive building first.
Yeah, or maybe a bit both.
Yeah.
Someone that really wants to give us all the money. Everyone's saying sign us up for 2070. Yeah. Okay, fab. I hope that answered your question, Julia. Okay, is there any other questions or other things? We got comments from Anna Jones, hiya Anna, saying, I love your ideas and that artists should be paid like footballers.
Wow.
Yeah. And then Rachel Rosen said a part, I don't know if you can see that comment about Yayo Kusama, but she's living in a mental hospital, isn't she? So yeah, it's quite interesting. Okay, well if there's no more comments or questions, I don't know if you've got anything else to say. Oh, we got one from Anthony actually, bear with me. So it says, is there a touchstone artwork or artist that has influenced your own practice? The works from your personal practice are stunning, and the parallels between the work and your personal history and character are clearly embedded in your work. And it says, fascinating talk.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, Anthony.
The one artwork that I thought, it's only because I thought of it today, really, was there was a piece by an artist called Adrian Pachi, who's Italian, I think, or he's based in Italy. I think he might be from somewhere else. But he makes these amazing works, or made these amazing films, where it's just a really quiet thing, where there's one where I'm going to describe it really badly. There's steps of an outside building, and one by one, there's a man sat on the steps next to a generator, and one by one they start their generators, and one by one the light bulbs come on to the generators. And I think probably like that, there is clearly, I've got a thing about lights going on and off and dusk and dawn, and this was shot at dusk, and I just remember being properly stuck with it for quite a long time. I can't even remember where I saw it, but I thought of it today. I just think about filming something that's like a temporary structure, lighting people up was really kind of poignant. Yeah, it'll be a different one tomorrow.
Probably. Thank you. I hope that answered your question, Anthony. Diolch yn fawr. Okay, so I don't think there's any more questions, but everyone's saying thank you very much, Anthony, and how
Thank you so much. It's so
Well,
weird not to see people,
I know,
but it's nice to see people. Yeah.
It's the only weird thing about these things. What's it? It's just a couple of things from like Rhian Have said she's up for the care home and saying great talk. Thank you.
Cool.
And everyone saying thank you, and then Anna Jones saying that she watched It's a Sin and has touched her and stuff. So yeah, everyone's just saying thank you and well done, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Down, Anthony. So I'm just going to say that we've got another talk next month on the 18th with Tracy Simpson from Other. So those tickets will be available from tomorrow morning. So if anybody wants to go for them, we'll be talking to Tracy next month about the future. So thank you very much, Anthony. Diolch yn fawr iawn pawb. Nos da.
Diolch yn fawr.